This week, York University was ridiculed for slapping a trigger warning on one of its archaeology courses, alerting students, wait for it, they may see images of human remains. Now, you might assume that budding Indiana Joneses are well aware that they may occasionally come across bones and bodies, but department heads saw fit to warn them anyway. My colleague Neil Oliver, GB News presenter and the Coast Guy, joins me from Stirling in Scotland. Neil, lovely to see you.
Good to see you too.
Now, we've spoken before about your background in archaeology, and you know when you were studying this subject, I'm sure no one warned you that you might be coming across the odd cadaver.
No, it's a very different world now. Academia, education. One of the things, I suppose, fundamentally that attracted me to archaeology was the fact that it was a physical subject. You know, we would spend the summers excavating. We would go on digs, and I would put in the months between, you know, whatever, June and October when we matriculated again, just going from one dig to the next. And it was that opportunity to get sort of physically involved with the subject that elevated it for me above something that was based strictly on book learning. I liked the physical aspect to it. This story from York, there was a story as well coming out of Glasgow University about the same time about the theology department in Glasgow University warning students that they might find the end of the Jesus Christ story a bit upsetting.
There's a twist at the end of that story. It's quite a shocking twist.
So the two stories come out, and it's not the first time that I've heard this coming out of archaeology departments either. I won't bother naming any specific departments, but this idea of putting trigger warnings and telling people, surprise, surprise, that in the pursuit of understanding archaeology, they might be confronted with human remains. I've heard this before. I mean, I think it's a wider problem. I think it's accepting and indulging perhaps infantilization of students. Everything now as well is about feelings, personal feelings, how something makes you feel, first and foremost, regardless of any other consideration to the inherent value of whatever it is you're talking about. It's difficult to know where to begin. I mean, students at university are of an age where some are studying medicine and would be dissecting recently deceased human bodies. And across the environment of university, I suspect there's an assumption that people of age to be at university are adults with the maturity necessary to encounter ideas and images that might challenge, surprise, shock, even upset them. But if you're not in a place in your personal development where you're, as a young adult, when you're ready to be confronted by things that shock, then further education, be it archaeology or anything else, I would suggest it's not for you.
I mean, that's a very interesting point, isn't it? That it feels paternalistic in quite an offensive way. You know, it'd be like warning a trainee chiropodist that they might encounter feet from time to time. You know, I studied English literature, and I knew going in that this is going to be about death, rape, horror, all the worst things in humanity are in Shakespeare's plays, right? But I knew that, and for someone to have told me that, I would have found quite patronising. But why is it that young people are more annoyed by this sort of stuff?
Well, that's probably an aspect of the story that we're not hearing. I would like to think that just as I would have been 30 years or so ago when I started my archaeology degree, I would have been black affronted. I would have been deeply offended if somebody had suggested to me that I wasn't ready to be confronted with images of skeletons or the like. I would have found that demeaning. But I think there's a deliberate, concerted effort actually going on to discourage real learning. Academia is one of the institutions that's been captured by some sort of parasitic ideology that seems to be turning back time, undoing the very process of real learning, which is... I was drawn to archaeology, my subject, because it promised, and I was able to offer it, wholehearted, immersive inquiry in hopes of better understanding the world and our place within it. I wanted that understanding via archaeology, which is defined as analysis of the past by excavating and analysing artefacts and other physical remains. That is the essence of the subject. And human remains, when you encounter them for real on an archaeological dig, they are the most extraordinary resource. They are genuinely and authentically awe-inspiring. It's an opportunity the like of which it's hard to imagine having in many other pursuit, where you're physically in the presence of a fellow traveller from the past, and you're spending time with them. And at the purely physical level, you can get all sorts of information from a skeleton or from physical remains about the physiology of the person, about diet, about lifestyle, about disease and injury and cause of death. But at an even more important level, any burial, the deliberate deposition of human remains, is a reservoir of information. It's like a message in a bottle. The people who are party to that funeral have laid down a sequence of thoughts. Those thoughts and the way they understood the person and what that person meant to them is there to be revealed. And, and to some extent, the grief and the love demonstrated towards that person is there to be excavated also. It's such a potent reservoir. And I think I was changed by being in the presence of some of the skeletons and other human remains that I excavated, because it gave me a sense of awe about what it was to be dead. And therefore that sense of awe about life, about death, made me more in awe of life itself. It was a profoundly educational and life-changing experience for me. And the very idea that there's been a move to discourage a generation of students, to deny them that experience, which is so central to the pursuit of archaeology, I find deeply, deeply disheartening.
Well, that's very beautifully put, Neil. And this is one of these things, I imagine, it's very well-intentioned, but really quite misguided. Neil Oliver, thanks very much for joining me today. Sorry.